Hello, welcome to another episode of Oh My Menses. I am Corinda, naturopath, menstrual cycle educator, fertility awareness educator. Menstrual cycles are one of my favourite things in the world. Thank you for clicking or tapping on this episode today. Let's start off as we normally do with a cycle check-in. Where am I at in my cycle? I'm day 14. I'm day 14 today. But, and I know day 14 typically gets the rap of, oh, it's ovulation time. But because here at Oh My Menses, we diligently track our cycles, we know that our cervical fluid and our basal body temperatures are much more useful biomarkers for determining when we ovulate instead of just going by the day of the cycle or even worse, the calendar date. So even though I am approaching my inner summer, I'm approaching ovulation based on what my body is telling me. I don't think I'm quite there yet. I have mostly been feeling an upswing this week for the last few days. Actually, I've been feeling an upswing since like the end of my period. So I'm pretty happy with that. I am trying to pace myself. The follicular phase is notorious for letting one get carried away. So I am trying to hold that tension of letting the energy come through me, letting the lightness lift me up, but also staying anchored and grounded, which is very important. So today's topic is one that was prompted by a dear friend and client, and it's a topic that's been done to death, and what, like in the women's wellness and health space, I suppose. I hope to offer more nuance to this discussion. I hope to offer maybe some more radical ideas and opinions to this discussion. Let's see what happens, but they're my intentions. So today we're talking about PCOS, Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, however you would like to refer to it. This is a condition that, in terms of like the rate of diagnosis and its like growing prevalence, is almost, it's just like rampant. And it's one of the things, as a naturopath in Australia, I can't use the word specialise because I'm not a medical specialist, but PCOS is one of my key focuses in clinic. People with PCOS, I understand what's going on when a client presents with the symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome, and naturopathically there is so much we can do about it that I just love working with those kind of individuals with those set of symptoms. And I will be getting into the nitty-gritty a lot more, and I'm going to be talking about the difference between how it's treated conventionally versus how I would treat it naturopathically. I'm going to be talking about I'm going to be talking about a lot about the diagnosis of PCOS, because, and this is probably what a chunk of the episode is going to be about, because I have a lot to say about it. I'm going to talk about why I don't give a shit whether a client of mine has an official diagnosis or not, because that's not the point. Diagnosis is not the point of naturopathy. Understanding what's going on in the body based on what the body is telling us, that's very important in naturopathy. Excluding certain diagnoses, ruling out causes is very important, but labeling an individual with a specific condition is not always the goal. There's more nuance there, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. So I'm going to talk about the diagnosis of PCOS and why it frustrates the shit out of me. And we're going to talk about root cause and why that's important. And we're going to start with the prompt that sparked this idea for a podcast episode. I put out to you all on Instagram saying, hey, I have the energy to talk about things. I have so many ideas for podcast episodes and emails, but I'm feeling stuck on what to talk about. Tell me what you want me to talk about. And a client and a friend messaged me saying, why fucking PCOS is only positive when you have a certain number of fucking cysts, but you got all the damn symptoms. And I said, yes, I can definitely blab about that. And she went on to say, when I went in for symptoms, I had 8 or 9, I'm guessing overgrown follicles or cysts, but apparently the limit is 10 or some shit. I know I was like one off being positive. And then they were like, here's the pill to help you with it. So we got a lot of problems going on there, and I'm going to talk about it. And first I'm going to say that PCOS is something that, maybe I'll say it's something that I once strongly identified with. I technically received that diagnosis, although it was a very loosey-goosey diagnosis, which is like, if I was, and I guess at the time I was determined to get a diagnosis for something, or get just understand if I had PCOS or not. I was at uni, I was learning about PCOS, my body was doing things, I was like, is this PCOS? And so I went down the modern medical route to gain some understanding about that. But if I wasn't studying naturopathy and I was like really lost and confused about my body, the diagnosis process would have just made me so much more confused, because I saw a gynecologist and I saw a referring doctor for initial blood tests, and even the sonographer, the ultrasound sonographer, all told me different things. That's great when you want clarity about what's going on, right? It's almost like we shouldn't be outsourcing our power and wisdom to so-called experts, because we're the expert in our own body. Low key, high key. Briefly about my journey in terms of like the diagnosis portion. I was having these symptoms. My cycles were getting longer. From a very young age, I've had symptoms of what I would call androgen excess. I think I've always been a very testosterone-y woman. I was prone to acne. I was prone to having hair growth in places that was not typical for the feminine phenotype of hair growth. So I started off with a doctor, letting them know what I was thinking about PCOS, letting them know the testing that I wanted done. They tested my sex hormones, but meanwhile I also got them separately tested through a functional pathology unit that I was connected with because I was a student naturopath. Because when it comes to hormones specifically and testing hormones, blood testing has its limitations. And so it's not even the best way to determine what's actually going on. So there's the first flaw with the criteria for diagnosing PCOS. It's usually based on blood tests that are pretty shonky. And then I was referred for a intravaginal ultrasound, it wasn't super uncomfortable. No, it was super uncomfortable, mostly because you're required to have a full bladder when you get the ultrasound done, just in case you're not aware or you're interested in the story. And then you go to the radiology clinic, and often you have to wait in a waiting room, but you need to come with a full bladder at your appointment time. But much like a lot of general practices, waiting times can be so unpredictable. So you're sitting in a waiting room, very uncomfortable with a full bladder, and then you go in and it happens. I guess they insert a device. They insert what would you call that? Sonography device? Wow. They insert a device into your vagina, and that's how they visualize your ovaries and your uterus. And the results came back, and my androgens were higher. My symptoms pointed to PCOS because my cycles were getting longer and longer. They were extending to and beyond 35 days long. So that's, when I say cycle length, I'm talking about the amount of time between two periods. So it was 35 days or more between two periods. I had the excess hair growth, hirsutism presentation. I had acne reappearing that had been cleared for like a lot of my late teens and early 20s. That was coming back. That's an androgen symptom. So the ultrasound showed very what they would call polycystic ovaries on both sides. But the ultrasound also indicated ovulation. And so the doctor looked at my test results and she's like, yep, you've got the symptoms, your androgens are high and your ovaries are polycystic, but you can't have PCOS because you were ovulating. We can see ovulation on your ultrasound results. And as a side note to this, with all the fertility awareness stuff I talk about and being able to track ovulation, when I talk about cervical fluid and basal body temperature and even hormone testing in order to identify ovulation, what we're doing is just narrowing it down to be able to say ovulation happened within this time frame. The only thing that can confirm exactly when we ovulated is an ultrasound, is an intravaginal, a well-timed intravaginal ultrasound. And I didn't just so happen to get it. I booked the ultrasound appointment for when I was expecting ovulation because I knew that would be more comfortable for me, because there would be naturally more lubrication, there would be more cervical fluid, so it would be less discomfort, is what I was anticipating. The closer you are to ovulation, the higher your cervix sits up, so I was also anticipating less discomfort because my cervix wouldn't be sitting lower and in the way. And in terms of, to put it so frankly, in terms of things entering your vagina, around ovulation is biologically, physiologically, anatomically the most ideal time. So I had this knowledge and I was applying that to my appointments. And again, if I really wanted a diagnosis, that's where I got caught out, because the doctor was like, well, with PCOS, you don't ovulate, and your ultrasound results show us that you were ovulating exactly on that day. And I just left it because my naturopathic understanding was like, well, no, that's not even the case. That's not even the actual official diagnostic criteria, which is what I'm going to go through. If that was the standard for PCOS, everyone who had PCOS would just not be having a period. And I'm not talking about a bleed that you get if you're taking the pill or if you're on another kind of hormonal birth control. I'm talking about a true menstrual period that occurs approximately 2 weeks after ovulation. And that just does not define the demographic of women who experience PCOS. Plenty of women who have the diagnosis, who have the symptoms, experience periods. It may just be that they're irregular or that they do have more anovulatory cycles. Anovulatory meaning a lack of ovulation. So it was just, it was so frustrating having the knowledge that I had and knowing I timed the ultrasound with ovulation, and just, anyway, so frustrating. I was also naturopathically looking at my blood sugar levels, which to me also indicated a kind of hyperglycemic blood sugar dysregulation picture, which also is a big part of the pathology of PCOS, especially when you're looking at it from a functional, naturopathic, holistic perspective. So my journey to diagnosis was frustrating. When I was getting investigated for endometriosis, which I believe was 1 or 2 years after initiating the diagnosis for PCOS, the gynecologist, while he was giving me a very brief, unplanned intravaginal ultrasound, he looked at my navel and he saw some acne around my jaw, and he was like, yeah, you've got like excess hair around your navel, like around my belly button, and you've got a bit of acne, like, yeah, you probably have PCOS. And I think he might have made a comment about the ultrasound on the spot, just saying like, oh yeah, and your ovaries, like, look, there's a few cysts going on there. It was not official. I didn't even get an official report. In fact, I don't even know why he gave me an ultrasound. Endometriosis can't really be diagnosed with an intravaginal ultrasound. Also, just FYI. Anyway, that's zooming into my story. Now, zooming back out to polycystic ovarian syndrome. Here's why I hate the name. Polycystic, multiple cysts. You can get uterine cysts and ovarian cysts and cysts pretty much on any part of your body. The cysts that are being referred to in the name polycystic ovarian syndrome aren't even actual cysts. And that's the first thing that shits me. What they're referring to when they talk about polycystic ovaries is a high number of developed enough follicles, which are naturally in your ovaries anyway. There's just a high number of follicles at a certain stage of development, so they're larger than the rest of your follicles, and so that increases the size of your ovaries, and that increases the appearance of the follicles on your ovaries when they're visualized during an ultrasound, for example. there are not actual cysts. There's a lot of different kind of cysts you can get, dermoid cysts, chocolate cysts, no cysts in polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's the first clarification. I also want to highlight that syndrome is a word used to describe, like medically, it's a word used to describe a group of symptoms that occur together. Cool. In typical medical usage, a syndrome often doesn't have an understood cause, course, or underlying process. And I think that's also a flaw when it comes to the name of this diagnosis, because when you look at the set of symptoms from a functional perspective, and we have so much good quality evidence and research on this now, there are causes. There is a course, there is a progression, there is an underlying process. There's multiple underlying processes, and syndrome is usually used as this thing of like, we can see that a cluster of symptoms is happening, and we don't know really what to do about it or why it's happening. Another point I want to say about PCOS and why there is so much confusion around its diagnosis is because it can appear so broadly and different in different individuals. Like the symptoms, it's not going to look the same in every individual. Like just by default, the nature of what they've decided to call polycystic ovarian syndrome, the group of symptoms can present so differently. We're not dealing with a cookie cutter. We've done a blood test and you definitely have this thing. There's no cookie cutter thing here. It's not a genetic test. It's not like you either have it or you don't. It's a very fluid, broad term that we're working with. So the stage is set for confusion because the name is stupid and what they're using the name to classify is too broad. So if you're confused about PCOS diagnosis or lack thereof, you're not alone. Your confusion is valid. So let's talk about the official diagnostic criteria from a conventional medical model. Still to this day, the agreed upon diagnosis of polycystic ovarian syndrome follows this thing called the Rotterdam criteria from 2003. And I'm going to tell you what it encompasses and I'm going to tell you what I don't like about it. So they've highlighted, I guess, 3 major symptom and sign categories that fall under this Rotterdam criteria. Follicles, they would call it cysts. Excess cysts appearing on ultrasound, what we call oligomenorrhea or anovulation, which means irregular long cycles or no periods, and androgenic symptoms. So that's the testosterone, androgen-driven symptoms and signs like acne, facial hair, hirsutism, things like that. So I've got evidence from a sort of review paper that's just sort of reviewing the diagnostic criteria for PCOS called Current Guidelines for Diagnosing PCOS. This is from 2023, March, a couple of years ago. And just a little bit about the history of how this criteria came about. Ultrasonographic evidence, so ultrasound evidence for polycystic ovaries was reported as suggestive of PCOS, but not necessarily diagnostic, which conflicted with the leading practice in the United Kingdom and much of Europe at the time, whereby polycystic ovaries on ultrasound were viewed as the defining feature of PCOS. This debate continued until 2003 so I think this is in the 90s. This debate continued until 2003 when 27 PCOS experts met in Rotterdam in the Netherlands at a conference sponsored by both the European Society of Human Reproduction and the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. They produced a joint consensus statement, commonly known as the Rotterdam criteria. These criteria broadened the phenotypic expression, so how PCOS presents, of PCOS to include oligoamenorrhea, so long cycles or no periods, hyperandrogenism, and polycystic appearing ovarian morphology on ultrasonography. In doing so, the prevalence of PCOS in some studies increased as much as 3 times compared to diagnosis using the 1990 NIH criteria. Furthermore, the use of these criteria allowed for the diagnosis of PCOS without hyperandrogenism, the high testosterone, which had previously been viewed as the primary defect by the 1990 NIH criteria. So there's confusion to begin with. In some countries, they were originally viewing the excess androgens as the key part of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Then in the UK and in Europe, they were viewing the polycystic ovaries as the main part of polycystic ovarian syndrome. So they came together, agreed on this thing in 2003. Since the 2003 Rotterdam criteria, all proposed criteria have included ovarian morphology with varying degrees of importance. In 2006, the Androgen Excess Society again made hyperandrogenism central to the diagnosis of PCOS, while affirming the relevance of ovarian morphology in diagnosing the syndrome. The AES guidelines required the presence of hirsutism, excess or abnormal hair growth, and or biochemical hyperandrogenism, so that would be high testosterone levels on a blood test, as well as either oligoanovulation, irregular cycles, long cycles, or no cycles, and or polycystic ovarian morphology, which they call PCOM, for the diagnosis of PCOS. So the most mild presentation of PCOS, which was women with irregular cycles with polycystic ovaries but without the high testosterone, was excluded, which is a bit silly, because that polycystic presentation of the ovaries is happening for a reason, and specifically paired with irregular menstrual cycles or lack of ovulation, that needs to be addressed. So that was really interesting that was the presentation that became excluded from the criteria. They've done other reviews on it. As recently as 2018, they've still decided that this is the best way to diagnose it. And I'm just going to refer to a table now, and I'll link the paper in the comments, in the show notes. So in terms of biochemical hyperandrogenism, there needs to be elevated total or free testosterone, and DHEAS can be considered, but testosterone is going to be the main thing that they're looking at. Clinical hyperandrogenism, so we're looking at how it presents in the body rather than just based on a blood test. They actually use something called a modified Ferriman-Gallwey score of 4 to 8, which is interesting. And they say the threshold level should be considered in the context of patient ethnicity, because I guess some ethnicities will naturally have more tendency towards more coarse, thicker, or just higher amount of hair growth. When it comes to oligoanovulation, they want to see cycles more than 35 days apart or less than 8 periods a year. And then they say, if you're highly suspicious for PCOS, but the patient doesn't have oligoamenorrhea, consider testing progesterone or luteinizing hormone. I think the cycle data is more helpful there. And it will be hard in terms of getting... So another thing when it comes to these blood tests is that the result is going to be heavily influenced by the time of your cycle that you're in. Even if you do have these really long cycles, even if you have less than 8 periods a year, your hormones are still going to be in some stage of the cycle. When you're not having periods, that's just an extended follicular phase. But even in an extended follicular phase, your hormones aren't just flatlined. It's going to be highly likely that your estrogen is going to be trying to do something, your LH and your FSH is going to be sort of fluctuating a little bit, even if you're not regularly ovulating. For me, for instance, because I know that it's best to get progesterone tested 7 days after ovulation, when I got my blood tests with that initial GP, when I wanted to investigate PCOS for myself, I timed it with my ovulation. So I would have had the ultrasound, like bang on ovulation, got the blood test 7 days later. And the doctor would have seen that and gone, yeah, you're producing progesterone, which also further confirms that you are ovulating, therefore excluding you from the PCOS diagnosis criteria. But again, according to this, if my cycles were more than 35 days apart, which they were, that puts me in the criteria. What's going on? And then finally, there's the polycystic ovarian morphology. So they were looking for more than 20 follicles per ovary in either ovary, so it doesn't have to be both. and an ovarian volume equal to or greater than 10 centimeters cubed. It's 3 cubed. You know, the little 3 on number, you know, I try my best. And that's based on transvaginal ultrasonography with a transducer frequency of equal to or greater than 8 megahertz. Now, that's also an interesting point because as time goes on, from 2003, that's more than, no, it's not 30 years ago. That's more than 20 years ago now. Technology in medicine changes. And the ultrasonography devices that they were using back then are not necessarily the same ones that are being used now. And I think also whether you have, you know, depending on where you're getting this ultrasound done, in what country, is it a public healthcare system, private healthcare system, potentially a higher grade machine could pick up on more follicles and could alter the final count. So also something to keep in mind of why this criteria is a little bit flawed, but I like reading that here that they sort of qualify the kind of ultrasonography by saying transducer frequency equal to or greater than 8 megahertz. Interesting. Now let's get back on track. The diagnostic criteria is that as long as any 2 of those categories are present, whether it's clinical or biochemical hyperandrogenism, irregular cycles longer than 35 days or less than 8 periods a year, and polycystic appearing ovarian morphology on ultrasound, just 2 of those are needed to get a diagnosis of PCOS. So, and I think some people have been diagnosed, some people that I know and clients that have come to me have received the diagnosis without any polycystic appearance of their ovaries on ultrasound. So it's interesting that my friend and client who messaged me is saying that she was told that she didn't meet the criteria based on ultrasound results, even though she had the other features. So she would have had signs of high testosterone and she probably had irregular cycles or less than 8 periods a year. And it sounds like she did have, again, in quotes, always in quotes because they're not cysts, polycystic appearing ovaries, but that there just weren't enough follicles. And so if we lived in a perfect world where getting a diagnosis for PCOS meant getting really high quality and very relevant and targeted treatment, this represents a person who's missing out on like quality treatment because of flawed diagnosis. And this is also why diagnosis is a bit of an art form as well and can't always be ground down and refined to this point of quantification and categorization of like fitting people in a box. Like I inherently believe that our bodies don't work that way. Our bodies are fluid and our bodies are capable of so much. And the human mind wants to be able to distinctly categorize things, right? And that makes life nice and easy and convenient, right? But we can see how it's maybe making the appearance of this syndrome more prevalent, making it seem more prevalent by widening the criteria, but then still females who are experiencing this symptom set are getting excluded from the criteria. My doctor's telling me a different thing to what my client's doctors are telling her. And like, it's a flawed system. Diagnostic criteria is flawed and it's a flawed system. And that's why I don't like it. Now, here's why getting a diagnosis for polycystic ovarian syndrome or for anything, unless it's like okay, when do I like diagnosis? And this is a real behind the scenes of like my unraveling as a naturopath. They've taken this beautiful, incredibly holistic, incredibly traditional, incredibly wise art form of health care, of patient-centered care, naturopathy, and they've tried to cram it into this flawed system and this this strong urge for evidence-based care, evidence-based models of health. And that evidence can sometimes be based on flawed data, because humans are inherently flawed and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to misinterpret things and we're going to be motivated by greed or just the wrong reasons. And so my education in naturopathy was in this like kind of Franken model of health, of trying to make this really artful, heartful modality more evidence-based, based on like a single society, like understanding and acceptance of what science and evidence is. And so my point but you weren't expecting this. You're watching my unraveling as a naturopath. And and you know, to clarify, these are all my opinions. My opinions do not reflect the opinions of any other naturopaths that you may or may not have heard of or have seen before. Even just from country to country, what naturopaths who study to be naturopaths learn is so vastly different. It's incredibly sad. Like it feels like there's not a strong foundation of naturopathy that's universal. It's so open to interpretation. We all practice so differently. I kind of love that. But in the same breath, I kind of wish we had a way more solid universal foundation, kind of like Ayurvedic medicine in India or traditional Chinese medicine. So that's my grief. That's a little bit of grief that I have about the industry that I find myself working in. So when do I like diagnosis? Because especially since last year, I'm just becoming like less and less of a fan. And I think Julie and I did an episode on the nuanced naturopaths about the nuance of like diagnosis and health labels and, you know, over-attaching to diagnoses. And I think it's an important conversation to have. So I think I like diagnosis if it's like a matter of life or death, if we're talking about identifying specific strains of bacteria that are giving you an infection, whether that's like an immune infection, a respiratory infection, a skin infection, a gut infection, I can get on board there. Probably some cardiovascular things. I don't know. I just think there's so much wrong. There's so much wrong with how things are diagnosed. And anyway, I'll stop myself there. So, why getting a diagnosis for polycystic ovarian syndrome isn't the be all and end all anyway, and why you should not be stressing about it. Diagnosis inherently does not address the root of what is causing your collection of symptoms, whether you have all of the Rotterdam criteria, whether you fit into all of the criteria, or whether you just have two of the categories of symptoms. Getting diagnosis does not address what's causing those symptoms. And this is why I believe a good naturopath can work with anyone. And this is, again, something that Julie and I talk about often. A good naturopath can work with anyone because they will always be asking the question, what is causing these symptoms? I want to acknowledge that I use PCOS in my marketing a lot. You'll find blogs and podcasts about PCOS on my website, in my Instagram captions, in my emails. I'm using that because it's the thing that people identify with. It's the thing in our current culture that gets people's attention when it comes to their bodies. People's first steps on their journey to their female body, their female reproductive system, their menstrual cycles may be because they receive this diagnosis, or maybe because they've heard of PCOS online or through a family member or a friend or someone they know getting diagnosed. So I'm using that language because it's in our collective consciousness right now, because people are talking about it, people are getting diagnosed with it, the incidence is increasing. But I don't use the term PCOS to say, hey, if you have PCOS, come see me because I have a foolproof way of treating PCOS. No, I get your attention by talking about PCOS because I understand the symptoms that come with that, and I understand the various root causes and drivers of that, the underlying processes that cause the symptoms of PCOS. And if you come to see me with or without a diagnosis, I'm asking the same questions. I'm not going, okay, so you have PCOS, so this is the treatment. I'm asking, okay, you have PCOS, and that kind of goes there in your history. Yes, it's on my radar. I'm curious about the journey of you getting diagnosed, how easy or challenging that was for you, what your test results showed. I'm interested in all of that. But it's not like, okay, now here's my 10-step PCOS protocol. No, I'm interested in how your body, the story that your body is telling us, historically and in real time. And those two are going to be different as well, right? You might have been diagnosed with PCOS more than 5 years ago. Is your body still presenting in the exact same way that it was 5 years ago? I'm not going to treat you based on a diagnosis. I'm going to treat you based on what your body is showing us. And not just what your body is showing us, how you're feeling. Let's bring the emotion mind back into healthcare, right? How you're feeling about your body and your interpretations about your own body are extremely valid. I would say more valid than whether you fit into a diagnostic box or not. That 27 experts came up with. Now, I'm grateful for medicine. I'm especially grateful for paramedicine and emergency medicine and like the art of surgery. And there are so many things I love that are man-made. And in all my gratitude for all the man-made things, I can still acknowledge that at the end of the day, we're humans and humans are flawed. And you're telling me that 27 humans agreed on this thing? 27 humans isn't a lot. And we're also talking about 27 humans from like one medical model, which is just one, like whatever you want to call it, Western medicine or conventional medicine. That's just one way of practicing medicine. There's a lot of different ways of practicing medicine and working with the body. Medicine isn't medicine, full stop. So I just want to like broaden our perspective in terms of society and culture and how we view medicine and like the inherently flawed nature of humans. And I think this is why I'm always drawn to nature because we didn't invent it. That sounds so bad. I'm so grateful for the human mind and inventions. I am. But I feel more faith and trusting in nature because she just works on her own and there's a universal life force to it and there's a universal truth to it. Whereas humans can only ever like interpret things to the limitation of our minds. We can gather the data, we can synthesize the data, we can discuss the data, we can discuss the evidence, we can gather the evidence, we can do the research, but there's What was I even saying? This is why you come to this podcast, for the nuance, for the conversations and for the hot takes that you wouldn't normally hear elsewhere. So I don't care if you have a PCOS diagnosis or not, because it's not going to determine how I treat you. In fact, I've had clients come to see me in the past who are really hung up on the diagnosis. And we might have a connection call. We might even have a few appointments together. And it's usually in the connection call where I talk about how I go about treating people who have been diagnosed with PCOS, which is very different to saying how I go about treating PCOS. And people will be like, yep, great, makes sense. And then at the end, they'll be like, but so you're confident that you can treat PCOS? Like this is your thing, right? Oh, and it's a tricky mindset. And sometimes those people have the most trouble with sticking to treatment plans and following recommendations, and who just struggle on the healing journey in general because there is such an over-attachment to a label of this thing that they're perceiving is wrong with them. And the perception is that I have this solution that will fix that problem. And that is not how it works. There are things that were happening before you ever got the diagnosis, before you ever presented with the first symptom of PCOS, that were starting an adaptive process in your body that were the drivers and brought the symptoms out of your body. Your body noticed a problem. Your body was facing an obstacle or struggling with a challenge, whether it was a deficiency of something or an excess of something in your life, whether it was diet or in your lifestyle or even in your emotional health, in your mental health, stress. And in that imbalance, your body was trying to adapt and correct. And it's in that adaptation process that can go too far one way that then allows symptoms to come out. And that's how we end up with diagnoses and syndromes and stuff like that and conditions. But the process started before you got diagnosed. Things were happening that were changing your body, that were triggering your body to go into this adaptation response before you ever stepped foot in that ultrasound room, before you ever stepped foot in the gynecologist's office. So having that diagnosis doesn't really change whether you're addressing the root or not. As a naturopath, the way I work, I'm curious about the root. What is at the seat of what is causing these symptoms in your body? What are the roots of PCOS? Insulin resistance. The root of insulin resistance is flawed diet. We love to think we all have a pretty good diet. If you grew up in a first world country that was westernized and you weren't living on like a hippie commune, there's probably some flaws in your diet. There's probably an excess of processed, refined carbohydrates that for years have been dysregulating your blood sugar metabolism and your pancreas and the insulin that your pancreas is being triggered to output. And another root of insulin resistance is circadian dysfunction, which also we all have, unless you are living out isolated from modern society in a tribe somewhere or on a hippie commune is kind of my goal here. You're exposed to artificial lights. Oh, artificial lights. Hello. You're probably working indoors. You're probably not getting as much exposure to the natural sunlight throughout the day as our bodies were designed to receive. You're probably not getting the exposure to darkness at nighttime that our bodies were evolved to experience. So then we have a disrupted circadian functioning, and that stuffs around with our metabolism and our sex hormones. So that's kind of two pathways that can add to developing this syndrome that they call polycystic ovarian syndrome. There's also chronic stress, and what I would call chronic adrenal activation is another root of PCOS, what can cause that presentation of PCOS. Your adrenal glands play a big role in the sex hormones that you produce. They play a big role in your ability to ovulate. They play a big role in testosterone production and androgen production, especially that androgen DHEAS that I referenced earlier. If your adrenal hormones have been high over a long period of time, that's going to start to affect your menstrual cycles. At the very least, it's going to start to affect you biochemically. If you're getting blood tests done, it's probably going to be reflected in those blood tests. If you're stressed over a long period of time and there are other factors going on that are increasing your body's production of androgens, you're probably going to get some androgen-like symptoms like excess hair growth, acne. Then there's a whole different category of what I would call pseudo PCOS. And this is in a world where I'm kind of already politely disregarding PCOS because I don't like the name, because the name doesn't make sense and the diagnostic criteria is stupid. And people can have the presentation of the syndrome for different reasons, and that's what we should be that's my biggest beef. We should be focusing on the reasons that people have the presentation of the syndrome, not what kind of presentation I guess the kind of presentation matters, but not whether they have it or not. Not whether it strictly falls under this 2003 criteria or not. That's not the point. If the body's talking to us in any kind of way, with any kind of imbalance, with any kind of dysfunction, let's ask the question, why? Why? Before we're asking what can we do about it, let's understand why is the body responding in that way. So this whole other category of what I would call pseudo PCOS, so it's like pseudo PCOS, is after coming off hormonal birth control. I most often see it with people coming off the pill. After they've been on the pill, either in their teenage years, when their ovaries were like most sensitive, when they were at this, peak part of development, and ovulation has been suppressed in those key developmental years or for a long period of time. Because let's not forget, this kind of hormonal contraception is so normalized that we've been told that it's okay to stay on it for decades. That's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to suppress ovulation for decades, especially not in our crucial years of puberty, first coming into puberty, in our first years after getting our first period. That is such an important time for so many reasons. And so, of course, if we suppress ovulation in those early years, our brain is still talking to our ovaries a bit and saying, we gotta ovulate, right? We gotta develop follicles. And because of the hormonal birth control, unless there's an accident or unless there may be a reason why it doesn't work in a certain body, there's not going to be ovulation, but you're still getting follicular stimulation. So those follicles are going to be developing and growing and maturing, not getting to the point of ovulation where they're being released and the ovarian volume is being reduced, but they're going to grow and they're going to grow and it's going to expand the ovarian size. And then you're going to come off the pill when you're 25 or 28 or 32, when you want to start a family and your period doesn't come back and you think, but I've had regular periods for years. Well, no, they were withdrawal bleeds. And so you go down this path of getting diagnosed and it's like, oh, you've got polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's like, well, do you have polycystic ovarian syndrome or were you just suppressing ovulation? Were you just hindering the ability for those follicles that are building up to be opened and released, which happens in ovulation? Were you just hindering that process and now your ovaries are polyfollicular? And also, because you've stopped the pill, you're getting a surge of androgens that were being suppressed for however many years you're on the pill. Because that also happens. This is why rebound acne can happen if you go on the pill and you had acne before you started the pill, you come off the pill. Some people get this rebound acne and it puts them back on the pill. They're like, oh no, I can't go off the pill. My acne comes back. Your body is rebounding after having a whole subset of hormones suppressed for however long. They are the roots. What I would consider the roots of what they call, this is what I consider the roots of what they call PCOS. And that's where our focus should be in medicine. And another thing I want to say about the treatment of PCOS, and like my friend said, what's funny is that they didn't diagnose her with PCOS, but they recommended the pill to her anyway. And I wonder how the treatment would have changed if she did get diagnosed with PCOS. Because so many people get diagnosed with PCOS and the treatment option is the pill or the Mirena, or now we have this new Kyleena, or there's other forms of hormonal birth control that you can go on if you want. They'll regulate your cycles. No, they fucking won't. They shut down a whole system in your body. I will never have a problem with our right as females to choose, but I will forever have a problem with the sheer lack of true informed consent. Because let me tell you how many doctors I've met that don't even fucking know what ovulation is or how to track it. But they're prescribing the pill It's such a common thing, right? So choosing to be on hormonal contraception is one thing. Being told that it's the treatment option for this syndrome shits me. Because it's not treatment, it's suppression. It's a band-aid. But we're not saying that. They're not saying that. And this is why people often just get worse and worse and worse over years. And the other thing I want to say that I've heard from many clients, whether they fall into the PCOS criteria or not, the doctors care more if you're planning on having children soon. There is less care about the form of treatment if you're not planning to have kids. Treatment is less of a priority if you're not planning to have kids. If you're planning to have kids soon, the sentiment is usually come back when you're ready to start a family. And then we can talk about treating this differently. And that's fucked. Because our health matters regardless of how much we want to start a family or not. Our fertility is important regardless of whether we want children or not. Our menstrual cycles are important regardless of whether we want children or not. If you're inhabiting a female body, your menstrual cycle is a vital sign. And I don't care. I don't care about being vocal against a lot of mainstream healthcare. I used to care about it. I want to be polite. Oh my God, no, we can't doctor shame. Sure. Yeah, great. Stop shitting on the fucking menstrual cycle that is crucial to females being able to thrive in their fucking lives. We're now up to 3 generations? Fuck, more than that now. 3, 4, 5 generations of women who have had ovulation suppressed because it's been normalized, it's been encouraged, it's been pushed as a treatment option for syndromes where the root cause isn't even the fucking focus of treatment. And then look at how many people have fertility issues when they do actually want kids. Let's prioritize fertility before we get to that point. Let's prioritize fertility when women show the slightest symptom. Let's not make them wait 10 years to get accurate treatment or targeted treatment. Let's not put them in the system for fucking a decade before they're like, no, I think I need to try something different. Maybe acupuncture, or maybe I need to see a naturopath or work with a nutritionist. God, I hope it's making sense that we have this thing called modern medicine and it barely addresses the impact of what you put in your body. That's a problem. Fuck, that got me fired up. That got me fired up. And I'm passionate about fertility and I'm happy for people who want kids and who are on that journey, but I don't like how the modern medical system puts the right amount of emphasis on treatment only when your concern is getting pregnant. And here's the other thing. One of the first people I knew to get diagnosed with PCOS when I was a teenager was devastated because the doctor said, you'll probably have trouble having kids. Saying it like PCOS is this thing that once you have it, you have it. And I don't know if this is radical to say. You can reverse PCOS. I had all the signs of PCOS. I fit into that Rotterdam criteria. And what a damn criteria it is. I don't have those symptoms anymore. I have regular cycles. I know when I ovulate. If I wanted to get pregnant, I would feel confident in my ability to get pregnant because of the work that I've put in over the years and because of the attention that I pay to my cycle. But this is just another layer of fear-mongering that there is in the diagnostic process of oh yeah, if you have this thing, it's probably going to affect your fertility. Do you know how much what a doctor tells you influences patient outcomes? They've done research on this. Okay, this is going to sound really broad, and so let's say this is my opinion, but you can look into it. Patient health outcomes are influenced by how a doctor presents information to them and based on a prognosis that the doctor provides. Do you know how many people die earlier because a doctor expected them to die earlier and presented the information to them? Again, take it or leave it. It's okay if you don't vibe with this part or anything that I say. It's okay. I promise. But it just feels like another example of where we're outsourcing this power to other people's beliefs, to other people's narratives. Have unwavering belief in yourself. I would rather that than putting all my faith in one doctor or even 27 PCOS experts that met in the Netherlands in 2003. I trust myself more than I trust 27 PCOS experts that met in the Netherlands in 2003. Put that on a t-shirt. So yeah, okay, I guess that's the first time I've said it publicly. You can reverse PCOS, which I guess it becomes another reason why diagnosis isn't the be-all and end-all. If your body's presenting with a collection of symptoms, if you correct the factors that caused those symptoms in the first place, you're probably not going to have those symptoms anymore. And you're probably not going to fit the Rotterdam criteria. Damn! Rotterdam! So I've spoken about what mainstream doctors and specialists would assess if someone was looking to get diagnosed with PCOS through that system. What I would assess as a naturopath, if I had a patient sitting in front of me with suspected or diagnosed PCOS, I would be looking at their blood sugar, fasted insulin, and their HbA1c, which reflects blood sugar regulation over the last 3 months approximately. I would be using a gold standard hormone test, for example, the Dutch test, which is dried urine test for comprehensive hormones, to look at their androgens, to look at their stress hormones, to look at their sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, not only to see the levels that they're at, but to see how they're being metabolized, to see the pathways that they're moving down, because there's not just estrogen and there's not just progesterone, there's metabolites. There's a pathway, there's a process. And that gives us so much more information than just one blood test result that has free or total testosterone. I look at one's cycle history. When did you get your first period? What were your periods like in your first couple of years of menstruating? How did they change? Have you been on any hormonal birth control or any medications that would have affected your hormones at any age? What were your mum's menstrual cycles like? What were your sister's menstrual cycles like? Aunties, etc. Is there a family history of fertility issues or menstrual irregularity? I'm also going to assess one's life and routine and work and stress levels. What's your life like? How stressed are you? How safe do you feel day to day? What's your routine like? Are you getting actually enough sleep? Are you getting enough exposure to darkness at night? Are you getting enough exposure to light in the morning? Are you overworking? Are you underworking? Are you putting too much of yourself out there? Are you exerting yourself too much? Or is there creativity and life force being held in and kind of stagnating? What are your stress levels like, historically and now? What was your upbringing like? It all matters. It all matters. And they're the kind of things that I would assess, again, whether the person sitting across from me on Zoom had an official diagnosis of PCOS or not. What can we do differently? I think we can start to change, again, acknowledging the importance of the medical system that we have. And even if we're not acknowledging the importance of it, I think we can acknowledge the place that it has, or at least the reliance that a lot of us have on it in our current style of society. And I think we can start to change the conversations that we're having in doctors' offices. Let's put our health into our own hands as much as we can through holistic education, through understanding what basic things in life, including diet and lifestyle factors, can result in what basic symptoms, what basic imbalances in our body. Let's get a really good, solid, universal, foundational understanding of what the menstrual cycle is, that we don't just have a period once a month for no reason. Let's understand our phases. Let's understand ovulation. Let's learn how to track ovulation. Let's feel confident knowing when we ovulate, so that when we're having these conversations in doctors' offices, we can say, no, I know I didn't ovulate because I didn't have a rise in my basal body temperature. No, I know something's changing in my body because I track my cycles properly, and my cycles have gone from a regular 28 or 29 days and now they're getting to like 37, 38, or they're just irregular. We can say, I'm getting pain at this time of my cycle. It's around ovulation. Something's going on with my ovaries. I would like to investigate that. I really believe, like, I hope it's not sounding hyperbolic. The most hyperbolic person in the room says. I hope it's not sounding hyperbolic that, like, tapped in, high quality menstrual cycle tracking is life-changing. The wealth of information that you will have about yourself when you start to track your menstrual cycle, especially when you start to track the signs of at least cervical fluid, but basal body temperature as a bonus, you just learn so much about yourself. And you have so much more intel than any blood test or any doctor's opinion on what's going on. I really do believe that. And again, maybe that sounds hyperbolic, and that's okay. So overall, the bottom line here is why I don't care if people who ask for my help have an official diagnosis of PCOS or not, is because I'm going to be looking for the root cause or underlying drivers of that person's presenting complaint for that specific individual, regardless of what official diagnoses they do or don't have. Diagnosis can inform my treatment plan, but it does not determine my treatment plan. And again, a good naturopath can rule things in and out. It can exclude, like go, yeah, no, it's not being caused by this, it's not being caused by this, or let's refer you for this investigation to make sure it's not some other kind of, more serious pathology. I do believe a good naturopath should be able to do that. But in terms of looking at these man-made criterias and going, yeah, you've probably got this syndrome, and now let's treat the syndrome. No, that's not how I work. It's not how I work. And guess what, folks? I'm only getting more hippie. I'm only getting more holistic. There are so many of my recommendations are so practical, are so just hands-on, grounded, practical. But I am only getting more comfortable with talking about the woo-woo when it comes to health and talking about epigenetics and generational trauma and emotions and how these all influence our health. I am only deviating further and further away from the system. I've said this to Julie, I will never be practicing in an office again. You will sooner find me in a forest, in a yurt, with a little fire, running my consults before I will be running them in an office again. And if that changes, I'll call myself out. But I don't think it's going to change. And that's where I stand on PCOS. Shout out to my friend who prompted this podcast. It's probably not what anyone was expecting. I would even say a little bit of it wasn't even what I was expecting from myself, but I'm glad it's out there. Links to information that I've referenced in the show notes. And hey, I just said menstrual cycle tracking could change your life, and I didn't tell you that I have a free menstrual cycle tracking guide that you can download instantly today. It will take you through the 3 major things to start tracking to get a holistic understanding of what your body is doing throughout a whole menstrual cycle beyond just your period. You can start to interpret these signs immediately and start to understand more about what your body is telling you and start to get insights on what your hormones are doing based on these 3 body signs that I walk you through in the free guide. Links to that below. Downloading that free guide will subscribe you to my fortnightly Corinda's Corner email, which I've been really enjoying writing and curating, and I'm really chuffed at how the community is developing and the response that I'm getting. So that's like just a nice little bonus. It's all free, but that's a nice little bonus you get for getting the free download. Of course, if it's not your cup of tea, you can unsubscribe at any time, but maybe check me out first. If you have a PCOS diagnosis or not, if you just have irregular cycles, or maybe you've got those excess testosterone symptoms, or maybe you have had an ultrasound and it did show polycystic morphology, there are so many different ways that I can help you. And I can promise you that none of those are going to be a cookie cutter, this is what I give to everyone with PCOS kind of treatment. It's going to be tailored to you. It's going to be based on your body, based on your history, based on your unique collection of symptoms and your unique being as a human with a unique constitution. And if you would like that kind of support using things like tailored herbal medicines, nutritional supplements, compounded powders, tailored lifestyle recommendations, if you need support enhancing strengthening your routine and your circadian rhythm, supporting your sleep, supporting your diet from a very functional and holistic perspective. If you would like support with your emotions as well, that all these things are woven into my treatment plans, and I would very much love to help you. If you're enjoying what I'm putting down, you can book in for a free connection call. It's free in cost. It's also free in obligation. You are not pressured to book in anything or pay for anything after that 15-minute chat. It's just us getting to know each other, me getting to understand a little bit more about your health story so I can see how I could be of most support, be of help to your healing journey. And you can suss me out and see if I'm a practitioner that you would like to have in your life, that you would like the support of. PCOS or not. Alright, all links below. If there's something you would specifically like me to get angry about in a future episode of Oh My Menses, let me know. Email is probably the best way at the moment. I'm still on Instagram sometimes at Corinda Holistics, or you can email me hello@corindaholistics.com.au. See you next time.